Hey guys, Pete Ramsey, HVAC Greatness. I appreciate you tuning in today. I've got a special guest today. I've got with me Travis Smith. Now, this guy has been in the business since he had a lollipop in his mouth, probably. But he is the owner and operator of a 40-year-old business that his father started, and it's called Sky Heating and Air Conditioning. He's also acquired another company recently called Oregon Ductless, so you can imagine where he's located. And he's multiple location. Now, if you want, we're talking about a $10 million operation. If you really want to learn how to scale your business, you need to stick around. Welcome to HVAC Greatness, your weekly source for HVAC business excellence. By subscribing and tuning in here, you'll get insider access to proven strategies, tips, and insights for the HVAC business owner who's tired of the stress and frustrations and struggles that are common to HVAC. Let's redesign your new, highly organized, and hugely profitable HVAC business where being an owner is fun again. Okay, so let's get right into it. Travis, how are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing wonderful. We got a little bit of snow, which is kind of odd for Oregon, being that people think it snows in Oregon, and really it snows in about 2/3 of the state. But the location where all the people are located, we get an inch of snow and we are shut down for the day. I mean, the heating companies don't even work in many cases. And if you see heating companies' Facebook posts, half of them are like, hey, we're actually open today. There's an inch of snow, but just so you're aware, we're actually open. This is kind of a one-off event for us.
That is such a beautiful area. I have been out there once before. I mentioned it to you before we went live that I have an uncle out there. That's really a beautiful area. What about the demographics? What does your typical customer look like? What are these high-end customers, or what do they look like? It's
a pretty high-end customer. We're a fairly green market. Our utility, Portland General Electric, not to be confused with PG&E out of California, but we have PGE here, is very forward-thinking, very green. They're very big into electric cars. We have a lot of Teslas in the area. We have a lot of homeowners that just not only want to save energy, but they want to conserve at the utility level and really help out with that. So a lot more green customers than average. It is a little bit higher average income. Median home prices here are now over $400,000, so homes are not inexpensive. It's very common to see $700,000, $800,000 homes and $500,000 starter homes. So there's a little bit more money going into HVAC systems as well as cost of living, so our prices do vary and reflect that. And on the financing side, Oregon, for some reason, every time Wells Fargo comes out and talks to us, because we do a lot of financing with them, they state that Oregon has some of the highest approval rates. So we're very fortunate to have a lot of good credit scores to be able to finance HVAC systems as well.
Man, that's really awesome. You know, each area of the country, it has its uniqueness. And, when I started doing some training, years ago, actually, when I started attending training, I attended some of the best trainers in the nation back in the day. This is way back in the 90s. And the dealers, like you and I, always had the same complaint. Well, that won't work in our area. You have multiple locations, so you're probably working different markets. Would that be safe to assume? Or can you have success in markets?
The markets are vastly different, and that's one of the areas where people told me the same thing. Oh, well, because like I just said with Portland, we've got higher finance rates, we've got higher incomes, we've got these more expensive homes, that you're going to get a different type of customer and a different clientele. So we bought a location in the Dalles, which is about an hour and a half away. The median household income in the area is about 50% less than it is in Portland. Homes out there you can still buy all day long for $200,000. Unemployment rate's a little bit different. It's much more sparsely populated. They're really two different areas, even though they are an hour and a half apart because they're separated by mountains. It's a different climate zone. Different temperatures. Will be 40 degrees in Portland and there'll be 20 degrees and 10 inches of snow. Conversely, it'll be 85 in Portland and could be 105 in the Dalles. It's a smaller area. There's anywhere between 60 and 80,000 people, depending on how you look at the demographics in our service territory. And people said, you can't sell high efficiency out there. You can't do higher priced, higher margin, low volume. It doesn't work. The people don't buy it, and nobody buys high efficiency. Well, the one thing I can say is that we sell more high efficiency out of that market than we do out of our Portland market. And that market, as I said, is only 80,000 people, and our Portland market's over 2 million. And even just as far as a company, we do about a quarter of our work in that area. And over 50% of our variable capacity heat pumps, and probably about 60% of our financing is in that area alone. So if anything, the people that said you can't sell high efficiency there were not only wrong, but they were dead wrong, because we do better with it in the smaller market than we do in our large market.
Wow, that is totally the counterintuitive than one would imagine. That is so awesome. Let me ask you this: your dad started the business.
Yes.
Has it been success all the way? I mean, did you just have it handed to you on a silver platter? I know there's some listeners out there say, "Oh, silver spoon son there. He's all successful." Well, if my dad, you can imagine filling in the blanks. Tell me a little bit about your ups and downs.
Lots of ups and downs. The biggest thing that I had was an opportunity. There was no handing it to me. Because it was a family transaction, we had attorneys involved. I had to get a separate attorney for my father in case there's ever any disputes. It was a full arm's length transaction with a set interest rate for paying him back, because, who knows if a bank would have loaned me money. He did loan the money for the company, but I had to pay it back at a dedicated interest rate with payments every single month, obviously with interest. And it wasn't a easy transition either, because there were many times where I actually made less. When my dad started the company in 1979, and I'll jump back to the history quickly, he was laid off during the recession and decided to go start his own company. And so he went out and started sky heating and air conditioning. His vision was to heat homes from the sky and go high efficiency. And he ended up picking up new construction and more new construction. And we were building very heavily here in Oregon during the 80s and 90s. And by 1996, he couldn't handle it. It was too much work for him, and he took on a business partner because he didn't know how to develop a manager. So he figured the only way to do this is to take on a business partner, and he and another company called Universal Heating merged. And so then in 2001, they grew even more and said, the two of us can't handle it. And they had employees, but they brought on a third person that was a third owner, and he started helping them manage the company. And I came in full time in the early 2000s and was working out in the field, but I always was paid less than most employees. So there were many times where I worked for below minimum wage. And not only did I work for below minimum wage, but my parents took half of my income and forced me to invest it and only gave me half my income. So I made a whopping $2.50 an hour through the late 90s and into the early 2000s, whereas my friends were making $7 and $10 an hour. Although it was one of the best things that they ever did for me, because that money they made me invest helped me pay for my college and get a head start on life, whereas I would have spent it on stupid stuff like a RC car or a Nintendo system. From there, I worked in the field all the way up until end of 2008. I was out doing post and beams, doing install, you name it, did a little bit of everything. I'll be honest, I'm a terrible installer. I'm pretty good at post and beams, pretty good at ductwork, but not a very good service tech, not very good at starting up units. And my dad said, all right, let's bring you in the office because you're not really good out there. Let's try you out in the office. And very quickly, our service department started to grow because I ran service, and it grew so much that we had so many leads from service that our sales guy couldn't keep up. So he put me in sales. And next thing you know, I sold about as much as our sales guy. But once again, I made about half as much as our sales guy made because I was the owner's son. So I didn't get paid on the same level. I just got a base salary that was lower than market rate, while the sales guy got a nice high commission, and I didn't get commission on any of it. And that I think he, of course, really wanted to test me and make sure, is this really what you want to do? And at that point, we had to forcefully kick out the third owner that came on in the early 2000s. He had a little issue, and don't want to get too much into that, but we had to kind of remove him from the company. And it was now the two owners, my father, his business partner, myself, and I bought out that third owner and started my ownership process of Sky Heating and Air Conditioning. And at that point, they realized that, yep, I'm in it for the long term. And by 2011, 2012, we were really starting to grow, and they were really pulling back. My father at the time was only working 3 days a week, maybe 4 hours a day, and still had a couple months worth of vacation that he took each year. So at that point, he said, okay, I'm ready. I'll sell you my portion of the business, and sold it to me December 31st of 2013. We kept going on an upward trajectory. We took on geothermal. We took on high efficiency, things that we'd never done before. We went from a service department with 22 maintenance agreements to over 1,000 maintenance agreements under my leadership of the service department. We went from paper dispatching on a calendar where people would go up and erase it throughout the day to electronic dispatching. And then the other business partner said, okay, I'm ready to go, and started to sell out to me as well. So I was the sole owner. And in March of 2015 is when we added our location in the Dalles. We bought a couple other companies between then, started a few other locations, shut down a location, and then bought Oregon Ductless. So it's been a long time coming into this. But the moral of the story is that it wasn't just a simple, well, you're the owner's son, so you're going to come in and take over and get the the corner office and anything else. Even while speaking of this corner office, which is another good thing, this building was not the one that we originally started out of. And my dad called me up one day in 2015, a year after he retired, and said, "Hey, son, you know the office you're at?" Because I was leasing it from him. He goes, "You've got 90 days to move. Hope you can find another building. Good luck." So, yeah, it wasn't as simple, but I also don't want to lie and say that it's easier to start a company, because it's not. Hands down, I was given an amazing opportunity, but instead of squandering it and letting the company go and using it as a personal piggy bank, I wanted to grow it, provide opportunity. And since then, we've won numerous awards for best heating contractor to work for. We won some awards from Water Furnace. We have a thriving YouTube channel. We've been featured in the ACHR News, and I've been elected to the board of ORACA. I was on the board of the Home Performance Council through the HVA of Portland, on the Water Furnace Dealer Council, had a technician on the Water Furnace Technical Council, and we really just took it to the next level like I wanted to do, and I can't wait to see what's next.
I hear you, Travis. I know that was a little long-winded for the listeners, but I think it's really important to establish I think it's good. I think it's really important to establish this guy wasn't just handed anything. He actually worked harder, because the person that was managing everything was the old man, and he knew that anything given is not appreciated, and it's just going to be squandered. And we all know stories like that, where the first generation builds it, the second generation sits on it, and the third one just squanders it, and it's all just because it's handed over. And so, thank you for that. I'd like to shift over, because this is about the listeners is as much as about learning about our speaker here. And what is it about the struggles? And you and I were talking financials. What is it about? Let's start with this. You mentioned that you started, I believe, with 2022 service agreements. You built them to 1,000. What did that look like? What financially might that look like in terms? Before we get into financial, what structurally might that look like in order to support that?
Well, the biggest thing is, when we first had the maintenance agreements, we had a very low labor rate, and we didn't know that we were building a department to lose money. And I think that's where people go wrong, is they assume that because their service labor rate is the same as their install labor rate, and their install makes money, or their install prices make money, or their company makes money, that service makes money. And so I was in task of building the service department, and we had 22 maintenance agreements. I go to a train dealer convention up in Seattle, and I'm talking to people. This is my first year at this convention, and talking to people saying, "Well, what does your company look like?" Because all we'd ever known was really new construction. And we were a new construction-based company before I took over. And the more people I talked to, they were service and retro. And I was going, man, for a while I thought they were doing something wrong. Look at this beautiful opportunity on new construction. And I realized that really I was wrong. There was so much more opportunity on retrofit and service than there was on the new construction side. So we started making that change. And it all came down to a company called Bell Red Heating and Air Conditioning out of the Bellevue, Redmond area. I don't know if it was an owner or a manager, but I talked to them and I asked them about how many maintenance agreements, and they mentioned they had thousands. And I was like, why do you have thousands of maintenance agreements? All the recurring revenue and all these things that come from that, the service techs that it supports, the repairs that come from that, the replacement that comes from that. And I slowly learned that that's the way you become a perpetual machine, is if you have maintenance that brings in core customers.
Just to hold on to that thought right there. So let's, for those who are kind of young and new, what does that mean? Let's say that you've got one of those maintenance agreement customers, and the air conditioning and or furnace, what have you, it's getting a little old, and you're going to actually propose to replace their system, compared to just somebody that calls you when they need you. They don't really have a service agreement, but they're a non-committed customer. They just call you randomly.
Yeah.
Versus somebody that just saw you on the internet, or like back in the day in the Yellow Pages. How do they look different in terms of what we call closing ratios? Do you know your numbers on that specifically? What can you share on that?
Of course, and knowing that goes back to the financials. You absolutely need to know your numbers as to where your lead sources are coming from, whether it be people that are calling you from service or people that are calling you from replacement, because you need to put your efforts towards that. So asking about the closing rates, it's not unreasonable to see a 70% close rate. And before we get too much into close rates are semi-irrelevant. And I hate using close rates because somebody can come out and say, well, I closed 80%. That just means your prices are too low. I closed 30%. Maybe your prices are way too high. Maybe your sales pitch is wrong. Maybe you're going after the wrong client. That's just a part of the picture, and you need to see the whole story. So, know these numbers are internal. We have other systems that these close rates are like this semi by design, but the percentage differences between them are what's most important. So on a typical service or maintenance lead, a customer that we have experience with, that has worked with us, that has talked to us, that has spent money with us at some point in the past, the closing rate can easily be in the 70% range. That's a much higher rate. 7 out of 10 jobs you're going to, they're buying from you. On the other side, just a standard, what I call marketed lead. So somebody that you're kind of targeting your main customer, you've got a set reason for why you're marketing to them, 50% range, and then just a general advertised lead. We saw you on TV, we found you on the internet, zero experience with you, not even always looking for a heating system, could be as little as 30%. So in many cases, it's a 20% difference to go from a existing customer service lead to a marketed lead to a advertised lead. And that's important to know, because you know where you got to spend your money.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Travis. And you guys listening, you should know that. He was all over that. If you have a high closing ratio, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a great salesperson. And Travis illustrated that brilliantly. But given the fact that you're probably not the cheapest in the market, you're probably on the upper end, you're getting a 70% plus closing ratio just because you have a relationship with them. So would that mean that how would that affect what you charge for a service agreement? Are you willing to take a loss on that? Do you make it a break even? Do you make a profit on let me see, the maintenance experience in this case? How does that roll?
I personally don't agree with giving a discount or breaking even on a maintenance agreement, because there is still zero guarantee that person's going. And I don't believe in the business model of a loss leader, because we can't take a loss year after year on that service agreement to hope to get another sale down the road, because that sale may never come. The average person I've heard buys 1.5 heating and air conditioning systems in their lifetime. What are the chances are that you're going to hit them during that 1.5 times that they purchase? So the maintenance still needs to make sense. And the problem is, people, I see this, they go out there and they sell maintenance agreements at a loss of $20. Well, not only are they losing $20 on their maintenance, but because they're doing more maintenance than they should be doing because their price is artificially low, they're going to lose out on that high margin service repair because they don't have the capacity. And in today's world, where a technician is the hardest thing to find, you need to make sure that everything that technician does makes you money. And ideally, if you can get it to then convert to a sale or an accessory down the road, I look at it as more of an icing on the cake than a chicken or an egg sort of thing. So I want that maintenance agreement, and then I hope to get a sale, versus other people that undersell a maintenance agreement so they can get a sale.
So do you have dedicated maintenance technicians, or only service technicians doing your maintenance?
We do have one dedicated maintenance and duct cleaning technician, and we're working on growing that. And then we have another couple of service and maintenance technicians. But of course, our number one goal is for them to be on service. Our lead turnover on service is much, much higher. So let's say we go on 100 repair leads or demand leads, depending on what you consider them. If you go on 100 demand leads for a service call, you may convert 10, 20 of those. I think the best of the best are probably doing in the 20 range, at least in our market. Whereas a maintenance, it may be 1 in every 5. There's 5 out of every 100. So your numbers are much, much lower at converting that maintenance customer over. Whereas if you have a service customer, it could take 1 or 2 repairs and they're converted to a new sale. Maintenance, it could take you 20 years of maintenance before they're converted to a sale. So you need to factor that in. How many times can you take a $20 loss on a maintenance or a $50 loss on a maintenance before you start to go broke?
Absolutely. I mean, I can definitely see that if you're sending a service technician to do that. And I just, there's different theories on this. There's different models, but I really like hearing about how each company is structured, what influenced that structure, For example, I know of many companies, and what they'll do is they'll have dedicated maintenance techs, and they are basically trained to be uniformed salespeople. They'll go in, they know how to do a basic maintenance, but to your point, they'll never have the analytical capacity of somebody that's trained at the level of a service technician, and they can identify airflow issues. They can identify indoor air quality. There's a host of issues that they can identify that a maintenance tech cannot. So, would it be safe to assume that what you're doing is during the shoulder seasons, that's when the maintenances are occurring, right?
Correct. Yeah, during the shoulder season, we're pushing hard on residential maintenances for furnaces and air conditioners, and we recently started up a commercial maintenance program that I think is going to be very successful to help with the shoulder season. But then during the busy season, we're working on demand that will turn over. Now, during the shoulder seasons, we certainly want to turn some of those maintenance customers over, but we need a large net and a large maintenance customer base to start evening out the ebbs and flows. And during the summertime, we can have a small base of repairs, but those are high turnover rates as well.
Absolutely.
And the biggest thing is just cutting out those ebbs and flows of the year.
Yeah, many of the listeners are going to relate to that. I know when I started, we didn't have this information. We didn't have key performance indicators or KPIs. If you guys are familiar with that, and basically that's an average as to what a certain performance level would actually be for the high performing companies. So we didn't know that you could achieve these different things. You mentioned 50% closing ratio on just regular customers that may or may not have a strong relationship with you, but if it's just off a marketing effort, 30. And I remember back in the day when we were looking at that in these classes, and somebody brought up the point, you have a 30% closing ratio. What that means, all that means is they call 3 estimates, 1 out of 3, that you're average. So, but when you start to break this down like you're doing, you can actually see more clearly the numbers. And you're talking about pricing. So you're pricing your maintenance agreements for profit. Clearly, you're trying to price a service for profit. But most of your margins are coming from replacements, like most companies, I would assume. Can you elaborate on
most of our? I've got to slow down there for a second, because not most of our margin, most of our gross profit dollars are coming from retrofit, but most of our margin comes from service. So with service, we're typically pricing to see ideally a 65 to 70% margin, whereas retrofit, we're going to be pricing for a lower margin, but we could have 2 guys that do a $15,000 install in a day versus service. If we're lucky if they're hitting $1,500 to $2,000 in repairs and maintenance in a day.
Absolutely, gross margin dollars. So, what does that mean? Let's back up to pricing. And you mentioned on understanding pricing. We've got a lot of listeners, and you start talking percent. Well, I make 50% profit. Well, what percentage of that is net? 50%. They don't understand the difference between gross and net. And I know we're getting really simple here, but just dabble on that for a moment, and then dive a little deeper as you feel comfortable.
Well, I think the biggest thing is people use the word make. And I've talked to people, and I talked to somebody in the forum recently that said, I made this much. I said, well, let me take a look. And they go, but I don't feel like it. And I looked at their numbers, and I said, well, you're saying make, but that's called revenue. The top line number, how much money comes into the company, is your revenue, not how much you make. And so let's get rid of that term make, because it can be used in so many ways. After you start with your top line revenue, you have cost of goods sold. That's anything associated back to that job. It's the labor associated to that, the benefits associated to that hour of labor, a permit, a subcontractor, the materials, the equipment, the financing fees, the spiffs, the commission. Probably missing something in there, but anything that you can say, yes, that relates back. Then that's your gross profit, anything after that. In that gross profit, then you start taking out your overhead. Something like a vehicle, that's not associated to one job. That vehicle goes to 10 jobs. That gas goes to 10 jobs. The tools get used on 10 jobs. That's overhead. That's something that every single month needs to occur. Once you then remove that, now you get down to net profit. That's the money that the company actually, in most cases, has on the side. And that's where we can get into a nitty-gritty discussion of all sorts of things that I don't want to dig into today, like depreciation and add backs and additional income. But where people go wrong, and this is one of the biggest things I see, and this is how it was taught to me. My dad always said, well, if you have a 30% gross margin and 20% overhead, you make 10%. The problem is, and this is what we teach our technicians, overhead is a fixed number. Gross margin should be a fixed percentage. And how do you mix a percentage and a number? So that's where terms like gross profit per man day that people are always going to see on the forums and online are going to come in. Because let's say your company is, just for round numbers, let's say your company has a gross margin of 30% and overhead of $10,000. Well, overhead, sure, it'll go to 12,000 some months, 8,000 other months. And sure, that gross margin will go from 30 to 32 down to 28. But for the most part, the margin stays consistent and the dollar amount stays consistent. Now, if you have a $100,000 month and you have 10,000 in overhead, it's 10% that month. But if you had a $50,000 month, 10,000 overhead is now a 20% overhead. So that overhead percentage can raise up and down, and you can't say my gross margin percentage is this, my overhead percentage is this, so I made this percent. And when looking at those numbers, you need to be able to convert overhead into gross profit dollars so that you can figure out, how do I earn gross profit dollars to cover overhead? And every month, that overhead number, imagine it's an imaginary bill, and you sit at your desk and you go, all right, overhead's $10,000, write a check for $10,000 and hand that out. The rest of the month, you are working to pay off that overhead. Once the overhead's been paid for, then the company has made money. And if you're an owner of a small company, I highly, highly encourage you to pay yourself a reasonable salary. Don't do what my dad did, because that was one of our financial struggles, is if I'm making $50,000 a year and our salesperson's making $100,000, and then all of a sudden I go to hire another salesperson to replace myself, I need to pay them $100,000 a year, and guess what? Next year, net profit's going to drop by $50,000 because I didn't price myself appropriately. So if you're a technician, you go, my company does $1 million a year and makes 20% net, and you have $200,000 at the end of the year, but you didn't pay yourself, you really don't have $200,000 net. Because if you were to step back and say, I'm going to go on vacation for a month, a year, or whatever it is, or as you get ready to grow and as you hire for your position, you won't have the money to pay for your position. So you've got to pay yourself a reasonable salary first.
So, great example. Thank you so much for breaking that down. So we know that a service tech, for example, requires more overhead in terms of, let's say, office staff's time versus installers. So we have to allot that appropriately. And we also know that each department, in order to understand them, that we really have to be able to break those numbers down. So if we throw everything into one basket and we don't have it properly divided up, we really won't get a clear picture. So there's been a lot of talk in recent years, particularly last 10, 15 years, about what they call chart of accounts at the accounting level. So traditional chart of accounts, if you just picked up a random software like QuickBooks way back in the day, it was kind of generalized. In HVAC, in your business, how do you address that? Are you different?
Yes, and you bring up some great points, because that's one thing that a lot of people forget about, is they forget that service costs more money to bring in each dollar, which is why I said service has to have a higher gross margin. On a service tech, you could be going on 4 to 8 calls a day. Well, that's 4 to 8 calls of advertising that have to come in, 4 to 8 times of picking up the phone, 4 to 8 times of invoicing, 4 to 8 times of billing, 4 to 8 times of trip charges, 4 to 8 times to pick up parts, versus one install with 2 people for a day. Which one would you rather do? Which one takes the least amount of time? If a service call takes almost the same amount of time to build or run the process as it does an install, and you're running more of them, but there's less dollars, you need to balance that out. So when it comes to how we have our chart of accounts set up, is that it's more so about the QuickBooks classification. So in our QuickBooks classes, we have a Oregon Ductless, the new company we purchased, service department and install department. Then we have the Dalles and Portland, new construction, commercial, retrofit, and service. So we really have 10 different departments inside of the company. Each one has their own set of financials. Now, if I'm looking purely at my company financials and say, I want to look at one line, I want to see how the company does, because ultimately that net profit is what really matters to me as the owner. What can I do to reinvest that back in the company, to reinvest in the people, and of course, put food on my table for my family at home? But I need to see how each department comes into that. And service, and I know we're talking about overhead as a percentage, the overhead percentage in service is typically going to be higher. Retrofit's going to be lower, and in many cases, new construction is going to be the lowest overhead because it's the longest amount of time on the job with the least amount of ordering and everything else. Although that's definitely changing in today's market with the ever-changing new construction market. And so you've got to know your overheads per department so that you can break those out appropriately and figure out how much you need to charge. Because my service labor rate is way different than my install labor rate.
Absolutely. How far can you see into those numbers? I mean, you can see all the way down to the department. Can you see within the department to what level?
So we can see, like I said, down to the department by location. So I can tell you the net profit of my service department in my location in the Dalles versus the net profit of my service department in Portland. And I can compare those two numbers, and I can compare the percentages between the two of them. So I can see, all right, this company and this department over here, because it's essentially a separate company. It's just one entity. But that in Portland, let's say, is hitting a 60% margin, and in the Dalles is hitting a 55% margin. Now I can break it down to a granular level and go, where's that 5% difference? Oh, this service technician has 25% of my cost in his labor, and over here, these service technicians have 20%. Why is that technician costing me more labor? Then you can dig into that and say, okay, this service tech or this department has more labor here. What's going on? And now I go, oh, well, this service tech in the Dalles, he's only running 4 calls a day versus Portland 5 because my Portland service techs are located by quadrant. And in the Dalles, I have 1 covering a 30-mile radius area, so he has to drive a lot more. So no matter what, I can never have him be as efficient as my other technicians in a larger, more condensed metropolitan area, which is also why it's so important that, you know, whether you're urban or suburban or out in the country, you set your labor rates appropriate to your market and to your financials, not some KPI. Somebody told me I need to be 200 an hour. Somebody told me I need to be 300 an hour. Somebody said I shouldn't go flat rate and I should be time and material at 110 an hour. Well, 110 an hour could equate to 200 on flat rate. You're just billing half as much time, but you need to know what you're trying to bill, what you're trying to accomplish, and your financials so that you can then reverse engineer that and accomplish what you're trying to get to based on your exact numbers.
Very well said. Thank you so much for that. But I have a question, and this is for my guys out there. They've got one truck. They've got the guy that helps them out occasionally, maybe an installer, and they're saying, you know, chart of account, I do it all myself. You know, that really doesn't apply to me. Would you agree?
Yes and no, because in the end, it all depends on what you're trying to get out of this. If you say, you know what, I don't want to grow, and some people say, oh, that's the worst thing in the world. I don't want to have employees. I just want to be out on my own. I want to be able to take off and go fishing when I want. I want to take a week off and go hunting. Maybe you don't need that level because it's going to be extra time and it's going to get you no benefit. Now, if you're that one guy in a truck and you go, man, I don't want to do this forever. I want to have employees. I want to start selling. I want to be in the office someday. You better get this figured out, because the sooner you figure it out, the faster you can grow. And as you get growing and your overhead starts increasing, there's a point where your overhead goes like this and sales go like this. And your overhead outpaces your sales because you go, well, I need to add a manager. Well, if you've never had a manager there before, that's a new cost. If you've never had a salesperson before and your pricing is based on you selling and not paying your wage, and especially if a salesperson's getting 5 to 10% commission, suddenly you need to raise your prices 5 to 10% to pay for them. So as an owner, to be able to say, here's my net profit, you need to know your financials. Otherwise, you're probably leaving money on the table. And when you look at a bigger company like myself that's doing 10 million, you go, oh, I can't believe they have that labor rate. They're screwing over customers. My labor rate's no different. I still have a truck. I still have a phone number. I still have a website. I still have advertising. I still have QuickBooks. What is different about my overhead than them? Well, I know my pricing is correct. And if you can't say, yes, my pricing without a doubt is correct, it's probably wrong, and you're leaving money on the table or you're losing money without knowing it. And that is a very bad spot to be in. That's why coaching is so important, and having somebody to be on your side, because none of us knew this. We weren't born with this knowledge. Even with myself, who had a father that's been in this industry for 30 years, I didn't know most of this stuff. I had to learn it. I had to go through coaching. I had to go to classes, talk to other people, and it needs to be learned. It is the most important part, as the absolute basis of any company is the financials. And without those, you're just throwing a dart at a dartboard hoping that it sticks.
Great point. Well, then I guess what we need to do is self-reflect for the little guys and say, you know, do I want to just be a one-man operation? I don't want the overhead. I don't want the headaches of employees and everything else. But There's another thing that a lot of us don't think about down the road is that as we get a little older and we're out there putting in the time, putting in the summers, being in the heat or being in the cold, it can wear on you. So do you want to do that until you just start to get burnt out? Or would you like to start to prepare in a way that you can start to unload and get a little help and take it easy a little bit? And then too, Travis, I know you've probably addressed this in depth. What are you going to do one day with the business? I mean, are you just going to let it go? You have a son that, silver spoon son, you can just hand it to, a little poke there, which clearly you're not. But, or, would you like to sell it someday? And if you're going to sell it, let me ask you this, Travis. Have you seen the case where these companies are out there? You've bought companies. My company is worth this amount of money. And you start breaking the numbers down and you say to yourself, well, if you'd have structured it differently, maybe it would be, but it's not. Are you seeing that?
Yeah. Oh, that's huge, because in most cases in our industry, companies sell for about 3 to 4 times earnings plus assets. Now, if you're a $1 million company who thinks they're making $200,000, you're suddenly going, well, I'm making $200,000. I'm going to get $600,000 for this. I'm going to get my vehicles. I'm going to sell this thing for $800,000. And you go on the open market, put it out for $800,000. And somebody like myself, the larger company or private equity that's coming in to buy is going to go, that's trash, and throw it out. And you're finally going to get an offer. And I went through this with another business owner recently, and he told me, I'm making $150,000 a year. I'm doing $600,000. I'm making all this money. And I went through and broke down his expenses for him. As I told him, I said, your business is maybe worth $100,000. I can't sell it for that. It's worth $500,000. I said, sorry, you're never going to get that. Nobody in their right mind will pay you that. And I said, I don't mean to be rude, but you need to be realistic. And he goes, well, that's less than I make in a year. And I said, you're right. I'm going to buy your company. Here's what I'm going to do. And I took their financials and I broke them down and said, I'm going to need to hire somebody for this, right? He goes, yep. And I go, what about for this? Yep, this. And I said, what are those salaries? And we looked at it, and he was really only making about $30,000 a year. And he had 2 trucks and 1 employee, and his wife worked there, but he didn't pay himself. He didn't pay his wife. And I was able to show him that at the end of the year, it was going to cost me over $120,000 to rehire for his and his wife's position out of the $150,000 he was making. So suddenly his company value went from his mind $500,000 down to my mind $100,000. We ended up never settling on a price, but I just heard about 2 weeks ago through a friend that he was now trying to sell his business for $50,000 because he'd ran it into the ground. And now he was accepting half what I offered him, and there wasn't much left. And my friend said, I wouldn't even give him $20,000 for his business today. And I saw a study through Forbes that said the average business in the contracting industry sells for 32% of revenue. So if you are doing $1 million and you've heard that a company sells for, sells for what it does in revenue, no way. You're lucky to get $320,000. And the last 2 companies I purchased, one was a little over $1 million a year, and one was almost $2 million a year company. I paid 10 cents for each dollar of revenue that they had. So $1 million company, I was paying a little over $100,000 for, and a couple $1 million company, under a couple $100,000 for that. And that's a realistic number of what a business is trading for.
Thank you for sharing that with me, because so many of us, we have the misconception. I've looked at purchasing businesses on several occasions. In fact, when I was beginning my business, there was a veteran around, and I didn't understand to the level that you do, that we do today. And the guy, I think he wanted like $800,000 for his business, and he was bragging about tens of thousands of clients that he considered customers. But I know that investors, potential buyers, lenders, they're going to look at guaranteed revenues. And if the owner, if your customers love you and they only want you, that's a great thing until you try to sell, because when you're gone, what's going to keep the customers around for the new buyer? So how are they tied in? And so one of the ways that you secure that is through maintenance, I'm assuming.
Yes. Well, that's one of the big things, is these companies didn't have maintenance agreements in place. And that was one of the big things. Now, go back to that maintenance agreement, what we were talking about earlier. Let's say you're selling your maintenance agreement as a loss leader, and the big company comes in, and you're buying the customer base, you're buying the employees, which we'll get into in a minute, and you've got a reoccurring revenue stream that's losing money. Do you think that's going to increase the value because you've got thousands of maintenance agreements, or decrease the value because you've got thousands of agreements that are losing money month after month? So that's a huge thing. That's one of the reasons I have no intent to sell. I plan on retiring here at 65 years old, and I'm 35, and I've got a son and a daughter, so hopefully one of them will buy me out. And yes, they will buy me out with interest, just like I did. And they better work here, and they better work their ass off before they even get an opportunity. But I still want the value of my company to be high, because the value of my company being high typically means the net income coming in from it is also just as high. Now, on the other side, when you buy a company, one of the most valuable things in today's world is the employees and the technicians, because you can't find technicians. You're going to be spending $10,000 to $20,000 to recruit a technician. What if you could just buy a company and buy their technicians? In my experience, of all the companies I've bought, and I'm at 5 now, half the technicians leave when you purchase the company within a month or two. At Oregon Ductless, we had 8 employees when we started. I knew that 3 of them I wanted to go anyway. Found out midway through that I wanted a 4th to go, and we're down to 2 of the original 8 people over there. But that's really all the company needed. They were overstaffed. They weren't making money. They didn't have a service department. They didn't have service rates. They didn't have maintenance agreements. All they had was new customers coming in through advertising, and they weren't doing the best job at that. I knew that that brand name was worth something, but the company itself, it didn't have a whole lot of value to somebody else. There was nobody that could come in and say, well, I'm going to go buy that company as a private investor. So the only value and the only way he could sell it, and that's why he came to me, is he knew that he had to sell to a larger company that could roll that company up into them, because it couldn't run as a standalone entity for much longer.
Speaking of that, were you around for the consolidators? Were you in play at that time when they were buying up all these companies? Did you see that go down?
I've heard about it. I was not, but I think we're through a similar phase. I don't know about other larger business owners out there, but I'd say once a week I get an email from private equity firms. I'm a private equity firm, and my family and I are moving to buy a company. We want to buy a company in the $5+ million range. One time, actually 2 times now, I think I've actually entertained them just because I wanted to see what they had to say, and because I need to know my competition. If I'm buying $5 million companies and private equity is buying $5 million companies, I better figure out what they're trying to do. So I talked to them, and both of them said that they're going to be coming in and they're buying a $5+ million company in the market, and they're going to be taking it over and bringing into some of their brand names. Companies like Direct Energy are doing that. I can't remember who else is doing that right now, but that's their goal. And you got to get to that larger number mark, because they're not going to be buying somebody in $1 to $2 million range. But somebody in the $5 million range, they could buy somebody in the $1 to $2 million range. But it goes back to your numbers. If somebody comes in and they're already making $100,000 a year because they had enough money to buy this company, they can't just say, well, I'm going to walk away from my $100,000 a year job to own your $150,000 a year company and pay off the debt. That company has to make $150,000 and pay them $100,000 for them to be able to do it, because it's got to be the net profit alone that pays for that loan.
Amen. Amen. Well said. So, I wanted to get one last thought from you before we start winding down. But before I do, kind of recap for our little guys. So we really have to understand what our pricing is. And we really, in order to understand what our pricing is, we really have to understand what our cost is and how to allocate overhead. And we've kind of got to understand accounting really well. And
yeah,
I hear this a lot of times, and you mentioned it, let me get a partner in here to handle this for me. There's training available. Is it rocket science? I mean, can a regular tech turned entrepreneur business owner starting to get his feel on it? Can he get his head around this? Is it that, I mean, he can measure subcooling, superheat, airflow, static pressure. Can he, is this beyond him?
Not at all. I don't consider myself a smart guy. I was a C student. I was never an A student. I think I got an A in like one of my classes. All my friends tell me I'm amazing at math. Plenty of people are like, wow, you are so good at math. I'm like, I hated algebra. I couldn't take I flunked out of college level math. I was just like, I'm done. I can't go to class. These numbers, it may sound complex, but if you're doing anything more than adding, subtracting, the occasional division and the occasional multiplication, you're making it too tough. It really needs to be that simple, and it really is that simple, but you got to find the person that can put it in that language for you to show you it's this simple. And most calculations are 2 to 3 calculations of numbers that you already know, like a gross profit per man day. Your overhead is $10,000. You have 4 technicians. $10,000 divided by 4 technicians means you have $2,500 in overhead per technician. Divide by 20 working days in a month is the number we use. I can't even do that math in my head. I need a calculator, but whatever that number is, that's the gross profit you need per day.
Sure.
It's very simple, but learning it and getting those concepts down, I'll be honest, I've never started up an air conditioner in my life on my own. I'm not a great tech, as I said. I'm not a great installer, but I know simple numbers and I know how to make them work. But they're simple, and that's what you need to know.
And I remember an illustration too, just to add to that. There was, those balloons that you inflate and they twist them up into figure. This guy took a balloon and he inflated it, and it was about this big. And he said each section here represents a day of revenues. If you have a bad day, and he'd squeeze it, and the rest of it would inflate. And he said you need to make more money on these other days. So if you have a good week, don't rest, because you might have a bad week next week is the point. So you've seen it change. Your dad's seen it change over the years. You've seen the old way of doing business. You've seen the new construction. You've compared all these things. You're acquiring, you're defending against the big corporations. You're in a position.
And hoping to be one.
and hope to be. What about with the changes with the internet? What about the changes in the way the world works now? People are going on. When I was in business, it was Yellow Pages. I mean, this is back in the 90s when I started. And you had to have the biggest ad, or people would name their company AAA so they could be at the front. That's where that came from. And
we've got those in our market too.
Yeah. So things are moving. How important is social media? How important is, Google AdWords was the buzz before. What do you see in terms of, the guys that are out there? They're kind of small. Can they compete with big companies, your size and beyond online, or should they? Maybe they should avoid it. What should they do? What are you seeing? Yeah.
So the one nice thing about the internet is that, unlike the Yellow Pages and having to have the biggest ad and spend thousands of dollars a month, when it comes to pay-per-click, your ad displays right next to mine, and you're paying the same price as mine is. You may have your ad seen 5 times and mine may be seen 100 times, but we're paying the same cost. And I really think that levels the playing field, because as long as you, once again, go back to your financials and are priced appropriately and have that money for advertising, the potential is unlimited today. We were actually kind of a later adopter, even though I'm a younger business owner. Came to pay-per-click. We didn't start until about March of last year or April of last year. We got right onto Google Guaranteed. And I went, oh my God, I can't believe I wasn't doing this sooner. We've been very big on conventional TV, on mass mailers. We've had a Facebook page. We've had a Yelp page, all those different ones. Well, we use the TV for branding. That is our lowest closing rate. It's massive branding. That ties in with our pay-per-click. But now that I have my other company working Ductless, I'm looking at the pay-per-click leads on that and going, my pay-per-click leads at this brand new 4-year-old company without a brand name, without any marketing, aren't that much worse than my major company that's been a player for 40 years with TV, with horsepower, with wrapped vehicles. The playing field is surprisingly level. And that's a great thing for somebody smaller. But it goes back to knowing your numbers so that you don't overgrow what you're spending.
Exactly. Thank you so much for that. And I think this is a good time to wrap down. You've volunteered so much of your time, Travis, and I appreciate it. Guys, Travis is a business owner. He's not getting paid for this. He's not a coach or an instructor, although he probably will be at some point, I would imagine, because he's really good at it. But we met, I don't remember what Facebook group it is, but it's basically within Facebook, there are groups, and you can get advice from guys like Travis and some of the others just for being a member and just following. So check that out, and hopefully everybody's benefited at some level here. From speaking to somebody who's been down that path, who's worked, from the ground up, whose dad was really tough on him, didn't have everything handed to him, and he's grown. He's acquired business. He's had successes, and I'm sure he can tell you about the failures and setbacks as well. But you know what?
Lots of those.
Exactly. If you don't have setbacks, you haven't tried. And what's worse is to never have tried and regret life later. Am I right?
I agree, 100%.
Okay, buddy. Travis, thank you so much for joining me on HVAC Greatness. I hope you'll come back. I'd like to, any feedback from listeners, shoot me an email. Let me know. Is there a specific topic that you want me to have this guy back on? And hopefully, if he'll be nice enough to come back, maybe we can have him address the questions that you're raising. And since this is not a live
I would love
forum,
to.
Okay, absolutely.
And if you want to get a hold of me, you can always send an email to travis@skyheating.com. I may not get back to you soon. I may not be quick because, once again, this isn't my profession. I'm not a coach. I'm not a consultant. As Pete said, someday, 20 years from now, I think I'd love to do that as I head towards retirement. But also search on Facebook, search for HVAC Business Owners or HVAC Owners Collaboration. That's a group that I'm a moderator of. And then the HVAC Business Owners groups, I'm in most of those too, and kind of spend some of my free time talking to people, and I learn a bunch there and give out a lot of advice. But no matter what you do, find a coach. Michael Jordan has a coach. Tiger Woods has a coach. And regardless of where you're at, a coach is one of the best things that can be there for your business.
Amen. And just a second set of eyes. So that's Travis, Travis, at skyheating.com, correct?
That's it.
Okay, buddy. Thank you so much. So we'll catch you on the next one. Pete Ramsey here, and we are out.
Hey, it's Pete. A quick thank you for joining me today on HVAC Greatness, or maybe just letting me keep you company as you're out running about. Either way, I sincerely hope that you picked up on something today that might help you and your business progress on your journey to HVAC Greatness. Want more? Make sure we stay on the air. Share the podcast with a friend, rate and review it, and be sure to subscribe to our email list at hvacgreatness.com so that you don't miss anything. This is Pete Ramsey signing out and reminding you why your customers love your business and what makes your company great. In one word, you. So let's keep refining your already good image and make it truly great.